Welcome, foolish mortals, to Halloween Treats, presented by the Look Back Machine. For the entire month of October, we bring you 31 episodes on 31 flicks. So sit back and relax on your broomstick. We have blood-curdling boogeyman and sadistic serial killers. From castles to were-rabbits to spine-chilling spine-tinglers. Oh, but that's not all. It's only a bit. There's also Dahmer, Dracula, and Wallace and Gromit. So turn down the lights and turn up the sound. And ready your heart, for it's about to pound. Because there's Halloween film history abound. Happy Halloween from the Look Back Machine.
One of the indelible delights of horror and Halloween movies is that the actors you've grown accustomed to for particular roles are able to stretch themselves into dark and brooding characters. Take, for instance, The Perfect Host, with the usual affable, uptight, and snooty David Hyde Pierce, showing his acting chops by playing a delusional psychopath with a fondness for dinner parties. As David Hyde Pierce said in his interview with New York Magazine, the character when you first see him is similar enough to the character I played on Frasier, that there's an extra twist for people. He's a different guy, but definitely cut from the same cloth. He's hosting a fancy dinner party and seems fairly sophisticated. The movie starts and they think, oh great, we know this guy. We're comfortable with him. This will be fun. The fun part is, you actually find out that all that information is wrong. Director, Nick Tomnay.
It's actually sort of a true story, sort of. So I have a friend who lives in the country, in Australia, where I'm from originally. And he was telling me a story about how he was painting his house. I think that's what it was. He was doing some sort of work in his house, and he sort of turned around and there was a guy standing in his house, and he was sort of sweaty and he looked a bit off. And my friend, like I said, he lives in the middle of nowhere, and so it was really strange that this guy would just sort of turn up. And he kind of could feel there was something weird about this guy, and he said that instead of like freaking out, he actually offered him a cup of tea. Which I thought was pretty funny. He was like, oh, would you want a cup of tea? And the guy was like, look, I've bogged my car on your property. I can't get my car out of your property. So, could you give me a hand? And then that's right. That's the first thing the guy said. And then instead of freaking out because he knew this guy was a bit suspect, he said, yeah, sure. Let me make you a cup of tea. And so then they sat having this cup of tea, and my friend was just like thinking in his head, this guy's going to kill me. This guy's going to kill me. He just could feel it. And they had their tea in silence. And then he took him, and he got some stuff out of his car, and he helped this guy get his car out of unmoor the car. And then this suspect guy just drove off. And my friend went back to his house and sort of sat around for a while. Was really freaked out, and then called the police and said, look, I usually don't do this sort of thing, but there was this guy, and he turned up and he told the story, and they said, can you describe him to us? He did, and they called him back, and they said, yeah, he's escaped from prison. And I was like, shit, what? That is crazy. And so, but that was the impetus, that was the beginning of me thinking about that story. Then I took that story and I started writing it as a short film. And at the time I was living by myself. For the first time in my life, I was living by myself in an apartment in Bondi Beach in Sydney. And I'd broken up with a long-term girlfriend that I had, and it was a pretty weird time for me, and I think I was feeling a little lonely. And so I sort of took that story that my friend had told me, and I used some of my own lonely feelings and wrote the first draft of The Host, which is the short that it was, the short film that I made. And then I had another friend called Krishna, and he and I were hanging out and spending a lot of time together. And I told him this story, and I showed him the first draft of this thing I'd written, and he thought it was great. And so then we started working on it together, and then we ended up writing the short together. And yeah, and then through the process of doing the short, I hired this guy called Graham Rhodes to play Warwick in the short, who is interesting because when we were doing the casting, everyone was coming in and they were reading Warwick really straight and kind of like, sort of in a very dramatic way. But Graham came in and he kind of understood the humor underneath it. In fact, I'm sure it wasn't as funny. The script wasn't as funny as the short ended up being because of him. I mean, he really made it much funnier than than I'd written it, I think. I remember in the audition him just doing Warwick, and he just had this way about him, and it was so good, and it just felt so much fresher than what I'd done and what other people were doing. I mean, I think that it was in there in the text. He just was able to. He's a very good actor. I think he's able to pull it out and make it something really alive. It was one of those moments where I was watching it in the audition and I was thinking, wow, this is like, it suddenly felt like a movie, And so I cast him and I really enjoyed the whole thing, and the actors were great, and just the short itself was just like, the whole thing ended up being a very positive experience. My wife and I moved to New York, so we did that, and we just moved by ourselves. And again, I was kind of lonely, but this time in New York by myself, because I was working as an editor. I was waiting for jobs to come in, and actually my visa was taking a long time to get cleared, and so I could be in the country, but I couldn't work for like 6 months. So even though I was signed with an editing company, I sort of just had to wait around. So that was perfect. And so then, it was perfect for me to write the feature. And so I wrote the feature, and I wrote it in a lot of different ways. And I suppose I wrote it with a bigger budget in mind initially. But I had a manager who was involved, and she would be reading it and giving me, notes. And so that became a kind of a fairly sort of long and arduous experience. But finally, I got it to a point where it could be made for a certain, budget. And we had tried to get the movie going, and we had like 2 different production companies involved, and it took a while. I think I'd written the script in 2000 and finished it in 2005, and I actually had a production company involved in 2003. So it took forever to get it going, and finally, my manager just said, "Look, why don't we just do it?" Because she'd produced all the Saw movies, so she had some money, and so she said, "Why don't we just do it?" So we went and made that movie. We had the budget was $500,000, which is not a lot, obviously. We did it in 17 days. But the benefit of it taking so long was that I had a lot of time to sort of start, to think about it, and sort of every time I'd do a new draft of the script, I'd be kind of reliving it again, reinvesting in it. And so by the time I actually got to do it, I was pretty familiar with the story, and planning the shooting of it was quicker than it would have been, I think, because I'd spent so many times drafting it and, trying to get it to a point where we can make it.
Please let me go. Just please don't kill me.
You're my guest, and I'm glad you're here. But you've only got yourself to blame.
We had a whole bunch of names on a list that we thought could play Warwick, and David was one of them. And then my manager was watching TV the one night, and she was watching Frasier, and she called up and she said, "Look, I know David's on our list, and I was watching Frasier last night. I just think he'd be so great." And so she kind of spotlighted him in a way. And I started really thinking about David for Warwick, and I thought, yeah, I wonder if he'd be interested in doing this sort of thing. It's a little darker than what he usually does, or what he's known for. He lived in New York too, so we met, and he'd read the script and he'd seen the short, and he liked both of them. And then we met and we had this great lunch, and on the spot, I think by the end of that lunch, I think we both felt like it was something that we wanted to do. And I remember him saying to me, the thing about this script that I love, or this project that I love, is that there are things about this that I absolutely know how to do, and I'm very confident that I'll be able to achieve what's written. But there are other things about this that I have no idea how I'm going to do, and I'm petrified of it. Some of the darker and more insane elements in the story, and that's also why I want to do it, which I thought was amazing and so great that he would say that. He didn't actually say, but I think probably the sex scene and probably some of the more violent aspects of it. I think probably I know that he had said to me that, obviously he was very well known for doing the role of Niles on Frasier. And I think when I met him, he was looking to do something very different to that and to sort of break away from that, because he's not that character. He's David. He's not that person. But I feel like for him, perhaps he had felt, that he was only known for that, and I think as time has shown, he's a very accomplished Broadway actor now, and had always been. He's a brilliant actor. And so I think that for him, he was just looking to stretch himself and to do things that were exciting to him, but also in a way to sort of to expand people's view of who he was as an actor, and to stretch himself and to do something new. And ultimately, I think that he thought it was pretty fun. And I know that the short helped a lot, because he liked the short a great deal. And so, but when we got to shooting it, and I was aware that, he had said to me, there are parts of this character that scare me, that I'm excited to do, but are sort of like, a little frightening, because I'm going to be out of my comfort zone. And I remember when we were shooting, like the sex scene and the cutting scene and a few of those things, and I guess I can't even remember how I directed him, to be honest. I do remember in those instances feeling quite sure that if he was absolutely confident in what he was doing and non-apologetic in how he was presenting these events, that it would really work. The audience would be sort of entertained and horrified by it, but not repulsed in any way, despite the fact that what he was doing was extreme. I remember feeling that and saying that to him, and I don't know whether he listened to me or not, but I feel like when I watched the movie, he is doing it like that, and I think that's part of the reason why for me at least, those moments work really well.
It's a cheeky little drop, isn't it?
So this is full of spoilers, right? That's right. It's all right, isn't it? When I started thinking about adapting it into a feature, my whole intention was that I sort of thought, well, I wasn't overly interested in naturalism and realism. That's not what the film is about for me. It was more, I started thinking more about the idea of, what if Warwick were making this movie? What if this character was involved somehow in sort of plotting out this film? Because of the nature of the reveals and the twists in the film, I was thinking that the reveal of Warwick as a policeman is so insane and batshit and kind of, it's sort of beyond realism to the point where it's absurd to the point where my hope was that you'd just be like, fuck it, this is cool, rather than like trying to sort of get into is this the credulity of the whole thing. It was more about a kind of gonzo moment where you suddenly have a character who's all about sort of deceptions and masks and stuff, revealing that he's a completely different person. Just the sort of narrative fun of that felt in keeping with the character of the rest of the film. So that's why that idea kind of came into it. I suppose the film is about perceptions and how, I guess the question I'm asking with the police at the end is, which one is real? Is Warwick real, or is the policeman real? Which one's the facade? Is what we present to the world really who we are, or is the private person the reality? And the police stuff, and I don't know if I did this intentionally, but the police stuff started feeling much more sort of soap opera-ish in the terms of the way I was doing it, because I felt like it was more of a facade, and I felt like the stuff in the house was more genuine. And I don't know if I did that consciously, but I certainly, when I look at the film, that's how it feels. I think if there's any value to it, I think that's maybe what it is that the stuff in the real world is more unreal in a way, more fabricated, less genuine than the stuff in the house, which is, although the stuff in the house is extreme and psychotic on some level, it is more genuine. And I suppose there was some element about which is the mask. The premiere was at midnight at Sundance, and honestly, I don't know why anybody wants to go and see a midnight movie. I mean, I'm always tired. So, and I actually don't think it's a midnight movie, to be honest. I think it's more of an afternoon kind of vibe. But when we got to the midnight screening, I think that people had assumed that it was going to be a horror movie, and it's not a horror movie. I don't think it's a horror movie. And it's an unusual film, and so that first screening, to be completely honest, was not great. It was just like, I don't think it was the right audience. But then we had like 4 or 5 screenings that were at different times for the rest of the festival, and it went really well there, like really well. And that's where Magnolia bought it, and so I got an agent, and and then went to cinemas, and it played the same day as some massive tentpole that came out in 2011. It played and it left, and the thing is, as I said, my greatest ambition for this film is that it would be regarded as a very good sort of like B movie, but not using B movie as a defamatory way, as a pejorative. I'm not saying that, because there are lots of B movies that I think are amazing, like Faster Pussycat Kill Kill and The Day the Earth Stood Still, and there are so many, Shot Corridor. There are so many amazing like films that are not engineered to be sort of consumed by as many people as possible. I was just making this little strange, funny, violent, and sort of joyful thriller, and I hoped that it would find a small audience, and I think it has. I mean, didn't make any money, but it has some people. I mean, some people really like it, and I've had people tell me, like, write to me, like, man, this is like my favorite film of all time. It's an obscure film, and I just hoped that it was going to be a good obscure film.
Thanks for listening to Halloween Treats, presented by the Lookback Machine. Stay tuned for the entire month of October for an episode every single day till November.